Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Before we begin, let me know where you're tuning in from down in the comments. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale. I sometimes wonder whether people ever notice how deliberately invisible I make myself. They look through me, or past me, never truly seeing who I am. The car I drive is a gray sedan with a little dent in the passenger door. My usual uniform is a pair of scuffed loafers and a blazer that doesn't quite fit in the shoulders. Bland, inconspicuous. But that's the point. I learned, a long time ago, that standing out can make you a target. Keeping your head down means nobody realizes what you're truly capable of. I'm Christopher Ward. I'm 36, and from the outside, I appear to be just another guy trying to find his footing in life. Behind that modest mask lies Summit Innovations, a multi-million-dollar software and technology company I founded in my early 20s. I built it from my living room when I was fresh out of college, hunched over a laptop that almost always overheated. People doubted me. Teachers said my dreams were too big for someone from a small, run-down suburb. But maybe that doubt was the fuel I needed. To understand why I conceal my success, you'd have to rewind several years to my first taste of betrayal. I was fresh off a breakthrough contract. My coding skills had caught the attention of a mid-sized gaming studio. I was riding high on self-confidence and, admittedly, a naive thirst for validation. I met someone, Tracy, who seemed to think the sun rose and set on my every move. I walked around starry-eyed, believing I'd found a partner who loved me for me. What I didn't realize was that she saw my sudden influx of money and, more importantly, a chance to hitch herself to what she called an up-and-coming big shot. I proposed. She said yes, almost before I could finish asking. 6 months after we got engaged, I found out she'd been funneling money from my fledgling business accounts, claiming they were for wedding planning. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd wiped me of more than just cash. She took my pride and trust with her, vanishing into the night like some bad cliché. I felt humiliated, but it was a stark lesson in how easily people can feign love when money sparkles in front of them. That's when I vowed never to flaunt success again. I forced my name off press releases, let my top executives be the faces of Summit Innovations, and stepped into the shadows. At first, it was just to protect myself from future heartbreak. But as the years went by, I realized it was also an excellent vantage point. I could watch people, potential employees, potential partners, even potential romantic interests, without them ever suspecting who truly held the power. Today, Summit Innovations employs several hundred people, headquartered in a sleek building downtown. If you asked random folks in the city who the CEO of Summit Innovations is, they might tell you it's some genius recluse. A few might name my longtime associate, Emily Chong, because she's the one who signs off on many public documents. That's exactly the way I want it. I still recall a conversation with my father when I was 8, standing in front of his auto repair shop. He rubbed engine grease off his hands and said, "You can learn a lot more when people don't think you're paying attention." At the time, I just nodded, not fully grasping his meaning. But as the years went by, especially after losing him to a heart condition right before I started Summit, those words have stayed with me. And they ring truer now than ever. I'm the unassuming man in the elevator with you, letting you talk about your day without offering so much as a hint that we're actually coworkers, or more accurately, that you work for me. I can't tell you how many times I've overheard employees discussing their weekend antics or griping about upper management while I stood a foot away in my scuffed shoes. It's an odd power, knowledge. The anonymity is a secret cloak I wear, stitched together from years of caution, heartbreak, and a hunger for genuine human connection. But while life in the shadows keeps me safe, it also gets lonely. I do want love. I do crave the warmth of someone who sees me for who I truly am, not my bank account or the big corner office that no one knows I inhabit after hours. The trouble is, I have no blueprint for telling who's authentic. Money can make a saint out of a con artist, or a con artist out of a saint, depending on perspective. So I wait. I watch. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years, living a life half in, half out. I rent a modest condo in a simple neighborhood. I drive that battered sedan. I keep a dummy resume for job applications, detailing fictional stints at small tech companies. Whenever my actual employees ask about my background, thinking I'm just some random consultant. They hear the polite hum of a man who couldn't quite find his career footing. Most of them don't look twice. The ones who do are too polite to pry. I sometimes laugh at how meticulously I've constructed this persona. If I told anyone the full truth, they'd think I was either paranoid or an eccentric genius. Or both. Maybe they'd be right on one count. The problem is, you can't live like this forever without consequences. You don't wear a mask so consistently unless part of you forgets who you are underneath. And maybe that's why I feel a weight in my chest at times. Like a silent alarm warning me that something big is coming. A collision between the world I've built and the real me. I've been hearing more of that alarm lately, especially when I think about how lonely it is to maintain this charade. It's hard to trust. Hard to let anyone get close enough to see the heart behind the carefully curated illusions. Still, a flicker of hope lingers in me. A little boy in a grown man's body who wants to believe there's someone out there who won't lie, cheat, or see me as a walking checkbook. The hush of my apartment at night feels like an echo chamber for these thoughts. Sometimes, I turn on the TV just for background noise, sports recaps, late-night stand-up, anything to keep my mind from drifting into that space where I question everything. Yet the alarm never fully stops. Because deep down, I sense that my anonymity, my protective bubble, might be tested soon. And I'm not sure if I'm ready. Still, I remember my dad's words. You can learn a lot more when people don't think you're paying attention. If something is coming, I'll have the advantage. I always do. The question is, am I prepared to face what happens once my mask begins to crack? A silent wind rustles my curtains as I check the time on my phone. Another late night, another day behind me. One day closer to something I can't quite see yet. I'm no stranger to confrontation. I survived heartbreak and built an empire from scratch. But there's a difference between deflecting random bullets and seeing a tsunami in the distance, knowing full well it's headed straight for you. Closing my eyes, I decide it's best to keep the mask on a little longer. But a small voice inside whispers that everything might soon change. If it does, I'll be ready. At least, I hope so. I remember the night I first saw Victoria. Crowded charity gala, bored socialites milling around in evening gowns, neon blue cocktails in their manicured hands. I was there because Summit Innovations had quietly sponsored part of the event under one of our philanthropic wings, an anonymous benefactor paying for the venue. From the moment I stepped into that room, I felt like an imposter, a ghost at a party thrown in my honor without anyone realizing I was their host. The chandelier in the lobby sparkled in a kaleidoscope of crystals, catching in the corner of my eye as I sidled up to the bar. I wore my usual disguise of near-mundane formality, a suit that looked okay from a distance but was definitely off the rack. Most of the men around me wore bespoke tuxedos. My tie was cheap synthetic, and I carried a set of keys for my ancient sedan. At least no one would suspect I was the guest of honor. Then I spotted her across the room. Victoria, standing with a small circle of people. Even from that distance, she appeared to radiate some kind of glow, or maybe it was just the champagne she lifted to her lips. A band played a jazzy tune, but I couldn't concentrate on the music because I was busy discreetly studying the lift of her shoulders, the tilt of her head when she laughed at something a friend said. She had on a deep crimson dress, an elegant number that showcased her confidence more than her curves. One stray lock of dark hair fell across her cheek, and she brushed it away with practiced ease. I told myself I'd wait 5 minutes. Just enough time to finish my drink, maybe talk to the bartender about local sports. But then the circle around her broke up, and she was standing on her own, scanning the crowd as though looking for something, someone. My heart did an unexpected stutter. Maybe it was the lights and the champagne's reflection, or maybe it was the small, hopeful part of me that thought, this is your chance. Talk to her. So I did. I slid over quietly, clearing my throat. Hi. I managed, hoping my voice didn't crack. You seem about as out of place here as I am. She tilted her head, a curious half-smile tugging at her lips. And what makes you think I'm out of place? That half-smile grew into something warmer. Victoria, she said, though this is definitely not my usual crowd. I'm here with a friend who insisted I come. I heard there's some tech sponsor behind it, maybe? I felt a pang of irony. Here she was talking about me to me, not realizing I was the tech sponsor. I heard the same. I replied simply, a grin tugging at the corners of my mouth. But, hey, free champagne, right? I clinked my glass to hers, and she let out an easy laugh. We ended up chatting for the next 2 hours, mostly about silly things. The best late-night pizza joints, a horror movie she'd just watched, my passing mention that I did some consultant work. I told her about how I'd bounced between different tech companies, never fully landing anywhere. My standard story to keep Summit innovations hidden. She didn't judge or ask probing questions. In fact, she seemed intrigued, telling me I had a certain quiet charm. I watched her expression for signs of that gold digger glint I'd encountered before. It never came. Instead, she seemed genuinely curious. "So you're a consultant. Do you enjoy it?" she asked. I shrugged. "Sometimes. But, it's not exactly stable." "Stability's overrated," she said, her tone surprisingly breezy. "My best experiences have come from leaping before I looked. Maybe that's reckless, but it's how I've found the most exciting people and places." Her confidence struck me. She didn't talk about money or prestige. She talked about experiences. I like that. By the end of the night, we were trading phone numbers. She typed hers into my phone, adding a winking emoji next to her name. When we parted ways outside the gala, I offered to call her a taxi. She pointed at a rideshare pickup zone and said, "I can take care of myself. But if you want, you can ride with me." I accepted. In the car, the glow of streetlights reflected in her eyes, and I felt something soft stir inside me. Hope. Maybe she was different. I told myself I'd remain cautious, but that vow was already slipping. She asked if I had big plans or if I was just drifting. For a split second, I was tempted to drop the charade, to say, "Actually, I own the entire building we just left." But I didn't. I told her, "I'm sort of a drifter right now, but I've got ideas." Her response was a supportive nod, no judgment. She slid closer, and the rest of the ride was spent in comfortable silence, occasionally broken by stray comments about the city lights or the driver's choice of music. When we arrived at her apartment building, I walked her to the door. She turned back, gave me a curious look, and said, "Don't forget to call, okay?" "I won't," I promised. And for once, I meant it. I watched her step inside, my heart unexpectedly light. It's strange how easily she disarmed me. Looking back, part of me wonders if her initial kindness was real or if it was simply good instincts. But in that moment, I was convinced. Convinced enough to go home, fall onto my couch, and stare at the ceiling for half an hour thinking, maybe this time will be different. I know now that a single evening can't reveal someone's true character. But I was hungry for a chance at normalcy, at companionship free from the weight of my hidden empire. Was it foolish? Possibly. But that's what hope does. It makes us blind, especially when we've spent years alone. Before I drifted off to sleep, I texted her a simple, "Thank you for making tonight easier." She replied almost immediately, "Likewise, smiley face." That tiny message warmed me like a small torch in the dark. Of course, neither of us had any clue what we'd eventually become to each other, husband and wife. Nor did I guess how that seemingly genuine support would twist into something darker. For that night, it was just two near strangers sharing a spark of connection. And though I was guarded, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, she was as different as she seemed. Sometimes, I replay the early months of our relationship, searching for any sign that Victoria and I were on a collision course. We started dating a week after the gala. I picked her up in my old sedan, half apologizing for its sticky cup holders and rattling AC. She found it funny, not off-putting. Over dinner, she told me about her job managing publicity for a small events firm, how she loved planning parties and coordinating charities. She had big dreams. One day, she wanted to launch her own nonprofit that would help underprivileged kids learn art or music. Her voice glowed with passion whenever she spoke of it. I tried to learn more about her personal background, her family, her childhood. She was vague, describing a modest upbringing with loving parents who divorced when she was a teenager. She didn't dwell on it, and I didn't push. I know what it's like to keep certain memories locked away. I told her briefly about my father's auto shop and how I'd tinkered with computers as a kid, eventually drifting into freelance tech consulting. She thought that was cool, encouraging me to keep exploring bigger opportunities. "You've clearly got potential," she'd say with a twinkle in her eye. "Don't undersell yourself." On our third date, she invited me into her small one-bedroom apartment. A cozy space with mismatched furniture and pictures of her travels pinned to a bulletin board. She pointed to one from Paris and another from Tokyo, explaining how she saved every last penny from her job to see the world. I believe experiences are more important than fancy cars or big houses, she said, giving me a meaningful look. Ironically, I felt validated. If I had told her about my real net worth, would she have looked at me differently? In that moment, I believed she wouldn't. Our relationship escalated quickly. We spent countless nights staying up late, talking about everything from politics to pizza toppings. She'd gently tease me about being old-fashioned whenever I insisted on paying for dinner or opening the door for her. I teased her back about her love of dramatic reality TV shows. It felt good, light, normal. Eventually, I introduced her to my friend Emily Chong. Emily and I had gone to college together, and while she knew my secrets, she also knew how to keep them. Over dinner, Emily observed Victoria with a half-smile, like she was trying to gauge whether this woman was genuine or simply another Tracy in disguise. When Emily later asked me, "Do you think you can trust her?" I nodded, maybe too eagerly, because as Victoria and I grew closer, I saw no signs of gold digging. She seemed content with my supposed modest salary, occasionally covering the tab herself. "I've got this," she'd say playfully, pulling out her card. To be fair, it wasn't as if she didn't enjoy nice things. She lit up whenever I brought her flowers or took her to a slightly upscale restaurant, but she never demanded it. 6 months in, I felt so comfortable that I let my guard slip further than ever before. I told her I had a nest egg saved up from side gigs and coding. That was my half-truth way of explaining how I could occasionally afford more than my budget consultant life suggested. She barely reacted, other than to say, "That's good. You work hard. You deserve to enjoy what you earn." It was exactly the reaction I'd hoped for. No squeals about exotic vacations, no prying about amounts. Just acceptance. When she began talking marriage a few months later, it didn't seem abrupt. She'd say things like, "I love that I can just be myself with you," or "You're the first man who ever made me feel genuinely safe." I believed her wholeheartedly. So I proposed on a cool autumn evening under the flickering lights of a small lakeside pier. I thought I was being romantic, stuttering out how much she meant to me, how I couldn't imagine a future without her. She said yes, tears in her eyes, kissing me so passionately I thought my heart would burst. I was sure this time would be different. Our wedding was small. We kept it intimate, just immediate family and a handful of friends. Emily was there, watching me say my vows with a guarded but hopeful expression. She was my best man, so to speak, and gave a brief toast praising me for never giving up on love despite past betrayals. I saw Victoria's eyes moisten, and in that moment, I felt weightless. That weightlessness carried on for about a year. Victoria found a new job working part-time for a children's charity, which she loved, but it didn't pay much. I didn't mind. I told her I'd handle the bills while she pursued her passion. She was enthusiastic about searching for a house, saying she wanted someplace we can raise a family. I pretended I'd be taking out a hefty mortgage when, in reality, I could have bought 3 houses in cash. Eventually, we landed on a spacious, modern 2-story in a quiet neighborhood. The day we moved in, Victoria was practically dancing in the foyer, marveling at how wonderful it was. She squeezed my hand. "We're so lucky," she whispered. For a while, that feeling of luck was mutual. I almost let go of my old paranoia. Almost. But small cracks appeared when her friends Madison Price and April Adams started visiting. They were the ones who'd fling around comments like, "Oh, Christopher, you should really land a better-paying job," or, "Victoria, can you imagine how much easier life would be if he could pull his weight more?" She'd hush them, but not with much conviction. I remember one afternoon, sitting in the living room, hearing Madison casually say, "He's a sweet guy, but does he have any ambition?" Victoria laughed, a short, forced giggle. She looked at me apologetically afterward, but I felt the sting. It got worse when we hosted dinner parties. Her circle would come, bringing their expensive wines and conversation about lavish vacations. I was fine with them bragging about their esteemed careers, but they'd glance at me with subtle pity. Their body language said it all. I was the poor husband riding his wife's coattails. Victoria sometimes tried to defend me, but the attempts were half-baked. Other times, she joined their teasing, perhaps unwittingly, but it felt like betrayal in microdoses. I remember the day she suggested I look into fast food management as a viable backup. She said it with a light tone, but I could see a flicker of something else behind her eyes. exasperation, maybe? She asked me, "Don't you ever get tired of scraping by?" I wanted to shout that I was paying for the entire damn mortgage with money she had no idea existed. But I swallowed that. I smiled, said something noncommittal, and changed the subject. Little by little, a layer of tension settled over me whenever her friends visited. They'd arrive in their high-end cars, decked out in branded clothes, greeting me with condescending nods. Meanwhile, Summit Innovations continued flourishing in the background, a testament to my real competence. After they left, I'd slip into my home office, quietly logging into my hidden accounts and verifying that everything was still running smoothly. The contrast between what Victoria's friends believed about me and who I truly was felt surreal, even disorienting. But I kept telling myself I was protecting this marriage, protecting my heart. The best relationships, I thought, are built on more than money. There were moments, though, where Victoria and I felt in sync, like the days we'd cooked dinner together, joking about random things. She seemed happy, supportive, so I let the cynicism fade. I never forgot my vow to remain cautious, but I wanted to trust her. The problem with wanting to trust is that it blinds you to signs you might otherwise see clearly. By the end of that second year, the seeds of tension had sprouted enough that I began to worry. I'd catch snide remarks from her about tighter finances or cutting corners, and I'd nod, playing the role of the modest paycheck earner. I assumed we could weather it. After all, we'd built this marriage on emotional connection, right? What I didn't anticipate was how cracks can expand into chasms if left unchecked. I often reflect on the party that finally jolted me into admitting something was seriously wrong. It was a summer evening, and the backyard was glowing with string lights. We'd invited her friends and a few of their spouses for a casual barbecue, a time to unwind, or so I thought. Victoria had gone all out, ordering premium cuts of steak, expensive champagne, and artisanal cheeses. It felt more like a show than a gathering, with me cast as the hapless host. From the start, I sensed an undercurrent of judgment. Madison Price sauntered in wearing a designer sundress, her phone pinging every few minutes with work updates, or so she claimed. April Adams, meanwhile, clicked around in spiky heels, scanning our house like an appraiser. Their husbands, Graham Shaw and Sebastian Rose, arrived later, exchanging boisterous greetings and side glances at me. It was always that look, half pity, half superiority. I was flipping burgers when Madison sidled up. "Christopher," she began, her tone dripping with condescension, "Victoria tells us you've been trying to find stable work. Anything promising yet?" She sipped her champagne while waiting for my answer. My hand tightened on the spatula. "Still looking," I said, forcing a pleasant expression. "Got a few possibilities." She gave an overbright grin, patting my shoulder like I was a clueless child. "Don't worry, something will turn up." Then she wandered off, joining April in laughter about some joke I wasn't privy to. When the food was ready, everyone gathered around the patio table. Victoria chatted excitedly about a charity project she was involved in, never once mentioning my behind-the-scenes help. I'd used my connections at Summit to fund part of that charity, but she had no idea. I watched her describe how her tireless efforts were finally paying off. She tossed me a sweet, dismissive smile, implying, "He's supportive, but not particularly useful." Over plates of gourmet steaks and fresh salads, the conversation swerved to jobs and promotions. Graham boasted about an upcoming pitch he was presenting at his sales firm, while Sebastian bragged about a deal with an overseas client. April shared a story of how she cleaned house in her HR department, quietly ignoring the questionable tactics rumored around the company water cooler. Madison teased them all about office politics. Occasionally, they glanced at me, as if waiting for me to weigh in on some grand career story I obviously didn't have. Victoria took a sip of champagne and said, "Chris tries, of course, but the market's tough, right, honey?" She looked at me with an odd mix of affection and smugness. "Don't worry, you'll get there." Before I could respond, Madison let out a tinkling laugh. "Yes, you will. We all have faith, right, guys?" They chimed in half-heartedly, and I felt my chest constrict with anger. I tried to swallow it down. The hypocrisy was staggering. These people were literally on my payroll, or would be, if they only knew. But they remained blissfully unaware that the unsuccessful spouse sitting at their table could sign off their termination letters with a single stroke. After dinner, Victoria ushered us into the living room. I offered to help clear dishes, but she waved me off like a server. "We've got it," she said, but made no real move to clean up herself, instead continuing to hold court in the living room with her friends. So I quietly loaded the dishwasher, my mind churning with resentment. Their loud voices floated in from the next room. "Maybe we can get Christopher to drive for a rideshare or something," I heard Madison suggest in a tone that was supposed to be comedic but cut like a knife. Laughter followed. Another voice, April's, I think, chimed in, "Hey, that's not so bad. At least he'd bring some money home." Their laughter grew, and I paused, hand on the open dishwasher door. My grip tightened. I stared at the plates, the fancy silverware, and the half-empty glasses. My entire life was mirrored in these items. I paid for all of it, but here they were, ridiculing me in my own house. The shame burned, but so did a growing sense of cold fury. This had gone too far. I knew Victoria thrived on acceptance from her circle, but it never occurred to me how deeply she'd indulged their cruel banter to keep up appearances. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I took a deep breath and re-entered the living room. Victoria was mid-story about a funny incident where I supposedly messed up an interview. A wave of laughter greeted me as I walked in. She spotted me and quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Madison smirked, raising an eyebrow. Graham and Sebastian gave me sympathetic nods that felt more insulting than comforting. I wanted to shout, "How dare you laugh at me in the house I've bought, with money you have no idea I possess?" But I kept silent, taking a seat in the corner, arms folded. The conversation turned to high-end vacations, with April proclaiming she deserved a break in the Caribbean. The entitlement radiating off them was suffocating. Eventually, the group decided to head outside again for dessert. Victoria pulled me aside, whispering in an overly sweet tone, "Are you okay? You seem tense." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Did she really not see how humiliating this was for me? "Just a headache," I lied, forcing a bland smile. "I'm fine. Go enjoy your friends." She gave a small shrug and kissed my cheek lightly before walking off. Later that night, after they finally left, the house echoed with emptiness. I wandered through the living room, noticing crumpled napkins and half-finished wine glasses. The silence left space for my anger and humiliation to resurface in full force. I slumped onto the couch, trying to calm the swirling mix of bitterness and sadness. My phone chimed, an email notification from Emily Chong, updating me on a new contract we'd just won. A contract that would bring in millions. Millions these people assumed I couldn't possibly be part of. I stared at the phone screen, the subject line proudly reading, "Summit Innovations' new project." That was when something inside me hardened. If Victoria and her circle wanted to underestimate me, I would let them, for now. But a man can only take so much. If they weren't going to see me for who I was, maybe I could use that ignorance against them. The more they showed their arrogance, the more advantage I'd gain when the time came to reveal my hand. I rose from the couch, walked to the window, and peered out at the dark neighborhood. The tension in my chest coalesced into an idea, a spark of determination. I'd start by looking deeper into their lives. Not just for petty revenge, but for confirmation. Were these people as morally bankrupt as they seemed? I needed to know who I was dealing with, especially since they were so intertwined with Victoria. If her loyalty was with them, I had to protect myself. That night, I retreated to my home office, turned on the computer that granted me full access to Summit Innovations' hidden corridors, and resolved to dig. If what I found justified my anger, I would plan accordingly. A man holding this much power can appear weak as long as he wants, until the perfect moment to strike. And I sensed that moment was fast approaching. I can't pinpoint the exact moment my quiet determination turned into something sharper, something like vengeance, but it happened not long after that humiliating backyard party. Late one evening, I found myself in my cramped home office, a space ironically larger than some studio apartments, but perpetually cluttered with secondhand bookshelves and half-emptied coffee mugs. Beneath the dim, yellow glow of the desk lamp, I opened a secure login window, the gateway into Summit Innovations' internal servers. If you glanced at me from the hallway, you'd see a man hunched over his keyboard, face illuminated by the screen. The hum of the air conditioning was my only soundtrack. But inside my mind, a storm raged. I was tired of the mocking, the pity, the constant facade of a husband who couldn't hold a steady job. My wife, Victoria, had taken to rolling her eyes whenever I mentioned being out networking. We both knew that was code for me driving around aimlessly, or so she assumed. In reality, I'd slipped downtown to meet with one of my trusted employees, passing along instructions or analyzing data in an unremarkable cafe. Now, though, it was time to dig deeper. I clicked through the corporate finance folders, encrypted subdirectories that even most of my top executives never saw. Summaries popped up, quarterly reports, expense ledgers, vendor invoices. It looked standard at first, but as I combed through line after line, patterns emerged. Some were glaring, like a monthly entertainment charge from our marketing department that far exceeded any typical promotional budget. Others were more subtle, like a series of small, recurring payments to vendors that didn't match any real project codes. I recognized the signature of one name, Madison Price, our head of marketing, and one of Victoria's closest friends. Madison had developed a talent for writing charming proposals, but I saw behind that charm now. She discovered how to slip personal luxuries, trips, extravagant dinners, high-end gifts, under innocuous line items. Everything was technically approved, but only because she masked them carefully and gained sign-offs from unsuspecting mid-level managers. Over time, it added up to a fortune quietly siphoned from my own company. The more I uncovered, the deeper my resentment grew. Every laugh I'd endured at that barbecue or at countless dinner parties replayed in my head. They snickered about my supposed lack of ambition, never suspecting I was the one granting them the lavish comforts they bragged about. A sour taste filled my mouth at the realization I'd funded my own humiliation. I paused to reflect. Did Victoria know about this? She'd never seemed particularly savvy with numbers, but she was also no fool. Madison's behavior might have been an open secret among her friends, a secret they believed was safe from me. Anger pulsed through me, but I inhaled deeply, reminding myself to stay composed. With a click, I opened another secure folder, reaching out to my most trusted ally, Emily Chong. She was the only person who truly grasped my double life. We'd been friends since college, back when Summit Innovations was just a concept we brainstormed over instant noodles and cheap coffee. Now, Emily acted as our official COO, the real face at press conferences whenever the public demanded an executive figure. She kept my confidence, even as it baffled her that I'd remain hidden. I drafted a short message in an encrypted channel we used. Emily found more questionable charges for marketing. Need deeper analysis. Also suspect other departments, particularly sales, are inflating numbers. Let's meet tomorrow after hours. See. I hit send, then leaned back in my chair. My reflection hovered on the dark window, a faint silhouette that looked more tired than I cared to admit. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the faint clicks of the central air. Victoria was likely asleep or scrolling her phone for glamorous vacation ideas we supposedly couldn't afford. There was a time I'd have woken her to share my worries, hoping for comfort. Now, I expected scorn or dismissiveness. Maybe a backhanded reassurance that I just needed to try harder. Thinking of that ignited a spark in my chest. Enough was enough. If I was the one holding the true power, I might as well use it. Within 20 minutes, my secure chat chimed. Emily had responded. I've seen anomalies, too. Let's gather the receipts and cross-reference everything. Something big is going on, and we need to isolate all players. Talk soon. I typed a quick acknowledgement, then shut down my computer. As I did, I sensed a shift inside me, a pivot from wounded pride to systematic planning. When your marriage feels like it's built on illusions, you learn to rely on facts. Cold, unforgiving facts. And I had plenty. A mental image flickered. Victoria, radiant in our living room, scolding me for not pulling my weight, while simultaneously praising Madison and her career success. She had no idea how that success was bankrolled. Slipping into the bedroom, I undressed quietly in the near dark. Victoria stirred, rolling over to face me. You're up late, she muttered, half awake. Her voice wasn't concerned, more like an obligatory observation. Just job searching, I lied softly, sliding under the sheets. She gave a non-committal hum and closed her eyes again. I stared at her for a moment, recalling the day we stood exchanging vows. It felt like another lifetime. The memory pinched my heart, but I hardened myself against it. I reminded myself that illusions eventually shatter. My illusions about Victoria's unwavering support had begun to crack the first time she ridiculed me in public. Now, with each passing day, the fracture widened. I turned onto my side, trying to force sleep. In the darkness, my mind rewound to earlier that evening. She'd barely spoken to me during dinner. She'd had a phone call, smiling in a way that didn't seem meant for me. I pushed that thought away, focusing on the immediate problem at hand, the brewing corruption at Summit and the quiet fire fueling my quest to expose it. I tried to calm my racing thoughts by counting backward from 100, but the seeds of revenge had already taken root, and they refused to stay buried. The next few days were a blur of tension. Victoria's mood flickered between distant politeness and thinly veiled scorn. She seldom asked about my job hunt anymore, maybe because she assumed it was going nowhere. Meanwhile, I worked overtime, behind closed doors and hidden logins, piecing together every suspicious transaction I could find at Summit Innovations. One night, as I pored over endless spreadsheets, I heard Victoria's muffled laughter from the living room. A scowl tugged at my face. She didn't laugh like that with me. I stood, quietly patted down the hall, and paused by the partially open door. She was on the couch, phone in hand, chuckling at something on the screen. I caught a snippet of conversation. "You're crazy. I can't wait to see you." My stomach dropped. Maybe it was a girlfriend from her charity circle. Or maybe not. I crept back to the office, forcing myself to breathe. Could be innocent, I told myself. But doubt lodged in my mind. My heart hammered. I tried returning to the spreadsheets, my eyes tracing the suspicious claims in the sales department. Graham Shaw came up repeatedly, with inflated sales reports that generated oversized bonuses. A second name emerged, Sebastian Rose, who seemed to be leaking project outlines to certain subcontractors, giving them an unfair bidding advantage. All of it pointed to a network of unethical behavior right under my nose. Emily was a lifeline. We met twice that week in a corner booth at a dim, old-school diner. Over watery coffee, she handed me a flash drive. Cross-referenced everything. "It's worse than we thought," she said, voice low. "Madison's funneling thousands every month, mostly to personal accounts disguised as vendor payments. Graham's forging numbers. And Sebastian? We suspect he's giving competitor intel in exchange for kickbacks." I exhaled slowly. "They must feel untouchable," I muttered. "No one has questioned them, and the CFO probably rubber stamps everything because they've got a web of approvals that look legit on paper." Emily gave me a sympathetic look. "Chris, are you really okay with all this? On top of," she paused, but I knew she was referring to my rocky home life. "Victoria's growing indifference." I forced a tight smile. "I'll handle it," I said. "All of it." That night, I came home to find Victoria in the bedroom, rummaging through her closet for some fancy outfit. She barely acknowledged me. A swirl of perfume lingered in the air. "Going somewhere?" I asked, leaning on the doorframe. She flung me a glance. "Just drinks with Madison and April. Don't wait up." A twinge of bitterness flickered inside me. "Have fun," I replied flatly. She brushed past me, phone clutched in her hand. I noticed a new tension in her posture, an almost furtive energy. In our earlier years, I would have asked to join or teased her about a girls' night out. Now, it was easier to let her go. She seemed relieved I didn't protest. Before I heard the front door close, her phone chimed again with an incoming message. She quickly read it, lips curving into a private smile. Once she was gone, I sank onto our bed. My mind drifted to the time we'd shared real closeness. Inside jokes, flirty touches, stolen glances at restaurants. Lately, our bedroom felt more like a neutral zone. She gave me quick pecks on the cheek, a routine acknowledgement. The few times we attempted intimacy, it was mechanical, her mind obviously elsewhere. I didn't push. It's hard to crave closeness from someone who seems to resent you. The next day, my suspicions about her phone calls still nagged at me. After she left for a midday errand, I found her laptop on the living room coffee table. The screen was locked, but I knew her password. She'd told me once when I was helping fix a minor software glitch. My hand hovered over the keyboard, guilt tingling with curiosity. Finally, I typed in the password. The laptop unlocked. Most of her apps were standard, social media, email. But one instant messaging platform glowed with unread notifications. My pulse thudded. I clicked it open. At first, I saw typical conversations, her old college friends, a coworker at the charity. But then I found a chat labeled with a man's name I didn't recognize. The messages were short, flirty, and definitely intimate. References to meetups, affectionate nicknames, even subtle jokes about my apparent unemployment. My throat tightened. I read only a handful before shutting the laptop. A chill crept over me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was a confirmation of a suspicion I'd never wanted to have. Victoria was in close contact, with someone else. All those glances at her phone, the hushed laughter, the nights out, they weren't as innocent as she might claim. It was surreal. The woman I once trusted was actively mocking me with someone outside our marriage, echoing the exact attitude of her circle of friends. My mind flashed with anger, heartbreak, and then a steely sense of purpose. Strangely, I didn't feel the raw devastation I might have expected. Instead, it felt like a final puzzle piece clicking into place. We'd grown distant, yes, but seeing those words on the screen spelled it out. She'd chosen a path of betrayal. I could have confronted her immediately, could have called her in a rage, demanding answers. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the laptop and sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. I realized that Victoria's affair fit neatly into the pattern of exploitation all around me. People taking what they wanted from me while casting me as worthless. If she thought I was too blind or too weak to notice, she was sorely mistaken. Standing up, I placed the laptop exactly where I found it. My chest pounded, but I forced myself to breathe. Over the years, I'd learned that the best way to handle betrayal wasn't to lash out impulsively. No, you gather information. You confirm the truth. And then, when the time is right, you deliver consequences. The idea of letting her continue in ignorance, believing she was safe, fed my resolve. She'd never suspect I had the power to uproot her entire world. I walked into my office, closed the door, and switched on my computer. Evidence. That was the next step. Evidence of her affair, just like the evidence of financial crimes at Summit. I'd collect it all, quietly, methodically. The old Christopher might have begged her to explain herself. The version of me sitting at that desk wanted no explanations. I wanted enough proof to ensure she could never turn this on me or claim innocence. Leaning forward, I booted up an encrypted folder. Something told me I would need every byte of data soon enough. I spent the following week piecing everything together, bit by painstaking bit. By day, I played the role of the jobless husband, a convenient shadow drifting around the house, pretending to fill out online applications or run mundane errands. By night, I morphed into the silent puppeteer, orchestrating investigations that none of my unsuspecting employees realized were underway. One morning, I told Victoria I was off to check out a new job lead, then drove downtown to Summit Innovation's sleek tower. I usually avoided the main entrance, preferring a side door that the cleaning staff and delivery personnel used. It led to a service elevator, a direct ride to the sub-level floors where IT and data management hubs were located. That day, I took a different approach. Dressing in worn khakis and an outdated polo, I entered the lobby like any prospective applicant. The reception area gleamed with polished floors, a glass sculpture in the center catching the sunlight. A young receptionist with bright orange nail polish asked if I needed help. I feigned a nervous smile. "I'm here for an interview. They asked me to meet someone from HR on the 5th floor. She glanced at her screen. Name. I gave a fabricated alias, something Emily and I had set up in the system to test the waters. She typed it in, nodded, and handed me a visitor badge. 5th floor, talk to Ms. Brown at reception. With that, I stepped into the elevator, a swirl of adrenaline coursing through me. I knew Summit's interior by heart, but I'd never navigated it this openly, at least not in my nobody persona. On the 5th floor, I was greeted by Ms. Brown, a middle-aged woman with a tight bun who asked me to wait in a small conference room. The plan was simple. Let HR screen me as if I were an outsider applying for an entry-level position, see how they'd treat me, and maybe discover whether April Adams, head of HR, and another friend of Victoria, had a hand in the corruption. After a few minutes, a thin, bespectacled man stepped in, wearing an ID that identified him as Brian, HR specialist. He eyed me, took a seat, and opened a folder. "So," he began, scanning the resume we'd concocted, "your background is somewhat limited in relevant experience. Why'd you apply here?" I shrugged, injecting a hint of awkwardness into my voice. "I heard Summit is a good place to work, and I'm trying to get my foot in the door. I'm a hard worker." Brian barely concealed a smirk. Uh-huh. Let's see. He rattled off standard questions about teamwork, conflict resolution, and technical skills. I deliberately fumbled some answers. I wanted to see if nepotism or discrimination might rear its head. Sure enough, I caught a hint of dismissiveness in Brian's tone. He kept tapping his pen, glancing at the clock. At one point, he muttered, "We don't usually see people with such thin qualifications." I gave him a wan smile. "I'm willing to learn. I can adapt quickly." He clicked his pen shut. "We'll let you know," he said, standing abruptly. "But be aware, we have a lot of qualified candidates." With that, he left me in the little conference room, not even offering a handshake. My chest tightened. It wasn't just about being rejected. It was about seeing how the system April oversaw could so easily brush aside anyone they deemed unworthy. If a real applicant came in with potential but lacked the right background, they'd be tossed aside without a second thought. Quietly, I slipped out and made my way to the 18th floor, an area reserved for upper management. There, behind tinted glass doors, was April's office. She wasn't in, thankfully, so I couldn't observe her approach to employees in person. But I took note of a staff conversation in the hallway. "She's pushing that new hire through fast," whispered one HR coordinator to another, scrolling through something on a tablet. "No background checks? I don't get it." The other coordinator shrugged. "April said it's a friend's recommendation. We just do what we're told." I kept walking. Their voices drifted off, but the implication stuck with me. April was bypassing standard protocols to plant favored candidates. It lined up with the corruption I suspected, handing out positions to loyal associates or those offering her personal gain. The tension in my gut coiled tighter. This infiltration confirmed a toxic culture. Employees promoted or hired based on nepotism, while real talent or honest recruits got neglected. Satisfied I'd seen enough for one day, I made my way back to the lobby, returning the visitor badge. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I left. Outside, the brisk air hit my face, and I exhaled. My heart pounded, a mixture of frustration and grim satisfaction. Summit Innovations was rotting in places I hadn't thoroughly checked before. If I wanted to reclaim it, I'd have to tear out the diseased branch's root and stem. That evening, after returning home, I found Victoria in the kitchen. She was finishing up a phone call, her tone sweet and lilting, definitely not her usual voice for me. "Yes, I'll be there. I promise," she cooed, cheeks flushed. After hanging up, she faced me, expression shifting from bright excitement to polite neutrality. "Oh hey, dinner's in the oven if you want it." I tried not to let suspicion creep into my eyes. "Thanks. Busy day," she shrugged, rummaging in the fridge for a bottle of sparkling water. "Just errands, more volunteer stuff for the charity. Madison's planning an event, so I might help." She avoided eye contact. My temples throbbed. I set aside the bag of groceries I'd carried in. "I see." I wanted to add, "So that phone call wasn't from your new friend?" But I stayed silent. Let her think I was clueless. Sometimes you learn more when the other person doesn't realize you know everything. I opened the oven, finding a half-burnt lasagna. It looked more like an afterthought than an actual meal. I cut myself a square, ignoring the dryness. My appetite wasn't for food anyway. It was for answers. While I ate, Victoria scrolled her phone at the table, an occasional smirk flitting across her features. My eyes lingered on her for a moment, remembering a time when that smile used to be for me. She caught me looking. "What?" she asked, defensive. "Nothing," I replied, forcing a small grin. "Just happy to see you smiling." She frowned, suspicious, then went back to her phone. Clearly, she didn't believe me. That was fine. Belief wasn't necessary. I chewed slowly, my mind replaying the day's infiltration at Summit, the HR staff's conversation, and the knowledge that soon I'd have to orchestrate something bigger, something that would lay everything bare. But not yet. The final act had to be perfectly timed. Our eyes never met again that evening. After the plates were cleared, she retreated to the bedroom early, door half closed behind her. I sat on the couch for a while, gazing at the blank TV screen, reflecting on how far I'd come from the naive man who'd believe any kind word was genuine. Now I knew better. I'd hold my cards close until I was ready to strike. Eventually, I turned off the lights and climbed into bed beside her. She was facing away, as if even in sleep she wanted distance. We lay there, two bodies divided by invisible walls. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'd gather more data, more evidence. Soon enough, everyone would realize that the so-called powerless man had been watching all along, preparing. Somewhere in the darkness, a slow grin spread across my face. For the first time in months, I felt in control. The last week of planning felt like a slow-motion film, each scene imbued with an odd sense of tension and anticipation. Victoria's friends hosted one more dinner party, inviting us to their ostentatious home in an upscale neighborhood. The invitation arrived via text on my phone, which was unusual. Typically, they'd just talk to Victoria. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and mumbled something about needing more people to fill seats. I nearly declined, but then I realized it might be my final chance to observe them together before everything changed. So I agreed, letting them assume I'd tag along as the docile husband, ready for another round of ridicule. The truth was, I wanted to see how far they'd go when they believed I was fully under their thumbs. The night of the event, Victoria seemed restless. She spent extra time doing her hair, snapping at me when I suggested she looked great already. Finally, she emerged from the bedroom in a sleek black dress, expensive perfume trailing in her wake. I stood near the front door in my slightly wrinkled blazer, adopting my usual nondescript look. She gave me a cursory glance. "You could have at least ironed that," she muttered. We drove to Madison Price's place, an overly lavish condo with floor-to-ceiling windows that boasted a city skyline view. The second we stepped inside, I was hit by the swirl of perfume, cologne, and self-importance. April Adams was there, wearing a statement necklace that probably cost a month's salary for most. Graham Shaw and Sebastian Rose clinked glasses in the corner, toasting some success they likely manufactured at the office. A few new faces hovered about, friends of Madison, I presumed, wearing the same smug air as the rest. Madison zeroed in on me right away. "Christopher," she cooed, stepping forward. "So glad you could make it. We were worried you'd be too busy." Her lips curved in a smirk. The others laughed, a chorus of condescension. I forced a polite smile. "No, I'm free tonight. Figured I'd grace you with my presence." Her eyebrows flickered. My tone was more direct than usual, but she either missed it or chose to ignore it. "Wonderful," she purred, handing me a champagne flute. "Drink up. Don't worry about the cost. This brand's top-notch." Across the room, I noticed Victoria deep in conversation with a man in a tailored suit, someone I didn't recognize. Her laughter spilled out in that overly flirtatious tone she'd used on the phone. My stomach tightened. I set the champagne aside, not wanting to dull my senses. Tonight was about clarity. As the evening progressed, the group meandered between the living room and a small outdoor balcony. I caught snippets of conversation, Madison bragging about an upcoming business retreat, which I knew was charged to the company. Graham boasting about record sales, Sebastian hinting at some exclusive deal. And every so often, they'd throw in a snide remark about me. The unemployed husband. The comedic relief. At one point, I joined a circle where Sebastian was recounting a recent anecdote from work. He winked at me. "Hey, Christopher, maybe you can appreciate this. We had a clueless vendor come in, trying to pitch to management. Didn't realize we had actual professionals around." Everyone laughed. I just nodded, swallowing the retort on my tongue. "You do realize that management is me, right?" But I stayed quiet, letting them revel in their ignorance. Midway through the night, dinner was served at a long table set with crystal and fine china. Victoria sat next to me, but she paid more attention to the man across from her, the same guy in the suit from before. Occasionally, her knee would bump mine under the table, almost as if by accident, but it felt more like a forced reminder that we were still together. I struggled with my composure when she leaned forward to whisper something to him, both of them smiling as though sharing a private joke. My jaw clenched, the anger simmering below the surface. Still, I kept it in check. Soon enough, they'd see how misplaced their arrogance was. Graham tapped his glass for attention, launching into a speech about celebrating success among friends. He raised his flute of wine, to climbing the ladder, one rung at a time. The group cheered. April giggled, wiping away a mock tear. "We're unstoppable," she proclaimed. Another wave of laughter. I forced a grin for appearance's sake, but inside, a clock was ticking. I pictured the evidence I'd compiled, the files Emily and I had carefully stored. I could almost feel them burning a hole in my pocket, even though all that data was securely locked away in digital vaults. My eyes slid over each face at the table: Madison, April, Graham, Sebastian, and lingered on Victoria. They were so confident, so certain of their place. None of them suspected the precarious ground beneath their feet. Eventually, the group migrated back to the living room for dessert and coffee. I found myself sitting on a plush couch next to an older gentleman named Terrence, who turned out to be a junior executive from a different firm. He was neutral, lacking the smugness of the others. He asked me about my background, genuinely curious why I seemed so calm in a room of high flyers. I gave a vague answer, something about having done consulting. He frowned, as though sensing an undertone I didn't reveal. Your wife's friends. They're an interesting bunch, Terrence offered politely. That's one way to put it, I replied, scanning the room. My gaze caught Victoria's for a second, and she quickly looked away. Terrence followed my line of sight. You seem like you're holding something back, he said quietly, leaning in. I've been in corporate environments for decades. I know tension when I see it. I considered brushing him off. Instead, I offered a half shrug. Sometimes you learn more by observing than speaking, you know? He nodded, lips curving in a thoughtful smile. True. Just be careful not to let silence turn into regret. Before I could answer, Madison's voice trilled from across the room, calling for everyone's attention. She announced some fabulous dessert course and ushered Terrence away to sample homemade soufflés. Left alone, I glanced at my watch. Past 10 already. The night was dragging, but ironically, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Part of me almost enjoyed seeing them so oblivious. Even the frustration of watching Victoria flirt served as a reminder. Everything was fuel for what I intended to do. The deeper their betrayal, the stronger my resolve. Around midnight, we finally prepared to leave. Victoria was flushed with wine, leaning into me more for balance than affection. As we drove home, she stayed silent, staring out the window. I wondered if she was thinking about that man in the suit, or if she was steeling herself for the next round of hidden messages. My mind flicked to the stash of screenshots I kept on a secure drive, her affectionate texts to someone else. The memory twisted my stomach. When we got home, she kicked off her heels, stumbling slightly. I caught her arm, and for a moment, the tension hung heavy in the air. She looked up at me, eyes glazed with alcohol and a hint of guilt. Her lips parted as if she might say something. Instead, she just pulled away and muttered, "Night," vanishing into the bedroom. I stood in the living room for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Emily. Everything's set. Next week is final. My pulse quickened. I typed back a short reply. Understood. I'll be ready. Glancing down the hallway to the closed bedroom door, I realized how wide the chasm was now. We weren't just drifting apart. We were living separate lives under one roof. Any lingering hope for a normal marriage felt like an echo from a forgotten dream. I made my way to the couch and sat heavily. My eyes flicked to the old clock on the wall. Each tick echoed in my ears, a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. A part of me almost wanted to skip ahead, tear off the mask and reveal everything. But no, patience was my best ally. The stage was nearly set. All that was left was to wait for the final cue. In the hush of the midnight hour, I exhaled. Soon enough, I told myself. Soon enough they'll know exactly who they underestimated. I woke before dawn, staring at the ceiling in the dim half-light. My pulse thrummed with quiet energy, a sense that everything I'd planned was about to collide in one decisive day. Beside me, Victoria slept soundly, oblivious to the storm rolling in. Her arm draped lazily across the covers, but even in sleep, she was turned slightly away from me, as if we were already two strangers sharing a bed out of habit. Easing out of bed, I padded into the bathroom and flicked on the light. The mirror reflected the tension etched in my face, stiff jaw, slight furrow between the brows. Today was the day. No more half-truths, no more playing the clueless husband. A swirl of adrenaline coursed through me. In just a few hours, I'd stand in front of a boardroom full of unsuspecting people, shattering their illusions about who I was and what power I held. I turned on the shower, letting hot water pound against my shoulders. The steam made me feel momentarily cocooned, safe from the chaos that was about to erupt. But I also found myself drifting to an old memory, a time when I was just a boy, maybe 10 years old, watching my father close up his small auto repair shop after yet another fruitless day. He'd looked exhausted, hands streaked with grease, eyes carrying a heavy disappointment. And yet he gave me a soft smile, musing my hair, telling me quietly, "Never let anyone take what you've built. Not without a fight." Those words echoed in my chest as I toweled off. In a way, everything I'd done, founding Summit Innovations, hiding my success, curating my anonymity, was to protect what I'd built from the vultures of the world. And ironically, the greatest threat had come from the people closest to me. My jaw tightened as I thought of Victoria's betrayal, her mocking friends, the corruption festering at my own company. If my father were here, I wondered if he'd be proud of the stand I was about to take or sad that I'd let things go so wrong. Once dressed, I stepped into the bedroom, where Victoria was still asleep. The clock on the nightstand read just past 6. I needed to get going soon. I'd be leaving earlier than usual, but it wouldn't matter. She rarely asked about my schedule anymore. Quietly, I slipped into a crisp charcoal suit, an outfit far from my typical modest consultant attire. A subtle shift in my reflection. I looked like a man ready to take the helm. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself a small, private smile. I moved to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and took a seat at the table. The first sip burned my tongue, but I barely noticed. My phone buzzed, a text from Emily Chong. "All teams in place. Security alert set for 9 a.m. legal standing by." My heart hammered. I typed back quickly. "Perfect. On my way." Setting the phone down, I glanced around the house. This place Victoria had believed was funded by her own so-called savvy. The marble countertop, the designer stools, the chandelier that she'd fawned over the first day we moved in. Each item felt like a prop in a dishonest play. Today, the final curtain would drop. Draining the coffee, I placed the mug in the sink and walked to the bedroom door. Victoria stirred, eyes fluttering open. She blinked at me, confusion flickering across her face, perhaps noticing the suit, my resolute posture. "Where are you going this early?" she asked, voice raspy from sleep. I kept my tone neutral. "I've got an important meeting." She propped herself on an elbow, brow furrowing. "Since when do you have important meetings?" There was an edge to her voice, as though she found the statement absurd. I could have told her everything right then,